Hello and welcome to the Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Rosemary Brown. We're talking today about House Bill 37, a piece of legislation I've introduced in the House of Representatives that deals with hands-free cell phone use while driving. So we have a very distinguished group of guests with us today that are going to help with this conversation, help you better understand the need for it in Pennsylvania, as well as the intentions of my legislation and their thoughts on it as well. So welcome, thank you for all being here. And so I'm going to slightly, Secretary Richards, we're going to start with you with your introduction and your position, and we'll go down the line and we'll just start a very casual conversation here about the legislation.
Sure. Well, thanks for inviting us. Leslie Richards, I'm the Secretary for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, and very happy to have this conversation, letting people know what they can do to make everybody safer on our transportation network here in the Commonwealth.
Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me here, Representative. I'm Major Jim Basinger. I'm Director of Bureau Patrol for the Pennsylvania State Police, and we are here to discuss and support House Bill 37 today because it deals with distracted driving, and that is one of the major causes of crashes. And Colonel Robert Ivanchek has seen fit to send me here today to speak about that, and that's one of his major tenets, so that's why we're here.
Great. Glad he sent you. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, and thank you as well for inviting us here today. I'm Nina Waskevich with AAA North Penn, and AAA supports a strong and comprehensive approach to not only educating distracted drivers on distracted driving and the dangers, but also just further education and statistics on the overall effects of distracted driving while on the road.
Thank you, and it's a very comprehensive approach, I think, as far as the input on the legislation, but all of you are concerned, as well as myself, about the safety of our roadways in Pennsylvania and how we can always make them as safe as possible, and what we're seeing on our roadways as, you know, times change, things adjust, and I think we do have a significant issue with the phone use. So I have to always, when I speak of this legislation, remind that when you're behind the wheel, it's not about getting on the phone because you're bored or trying to make use of time, which we all know is very critical, especially in our positions. But how do we do a piece of legislation that helps minimize the impacts of the modern technology of the cell phone, which can be very useful, we know that. But we came up with House Bill 37, which really, as you all know, and maybe some of the viewers watching are not as familiar, it allows you to be on your cell phone hands-free only, so using a Bluetooth technology. The idea is to have two hands on the wheels, two eyes on the road, and your mind at task as much as possible. I think it's very important to note that you are still distracted, even on hands-free. So maybe we can just have a quick discussion about that, because I believe this is the best that we can do to be realistic and enforceable and reasonable as far as the cell phone use, to try to keep things as safe as possible. But it is important for drivers to know that it's not just, you're not distracted anymore. What do you think about that piece of it?
No, absolutely. Look, we do everything we can at PennDOT to make sure that our roads are as safe as possible, the assets, you know, around them, you know, our guide rails in there properly, our paint is down the roadways, and making sure all of our signals and everything we can do. But we do need help from the driver, right? The behavior of the driver is very important. And people think they can do it all. They think they can multitask, but they truly can't. The data has shown that texting, whether you are hands-free or not, on the phone even, is equal to 0.08% as far as a blood alcohol test. So you are definitely not driving and at 100%. And driving is a skill that takes 100% of your attention, 100% of the time. You cannot, you know, even take your mind off for a little moment. And driving is extremely complex. I mean, we see it as we're moving toward automated driving. It has been so much more difficult than anyone thought to teach a robot how to drive, because your mind is doing thousands of things at once. Right. And you have to allow, you know, for the 100% attention needed for that to happen. And so we really need everybody concentrating on what they're doing, keeping themselves safe, as well as everybody else on the roadways safe as well.
It's interesting that you say everyone thinks they can multitask, but you get very relaxed, especially as a driver who's been driving for 20 years. You think, oh, I can do this, it's no problem, and it's easy, but you don't realize the couple seconds it takes to just be slightly distracted. And we probably all had that mode where we don't remember getting someplace because we were either on a conversation or maybe your mind was even just thinking, right, remembering getting to someplace. But this does the best expecting the expectations on a driver to say you have a responsibility in Pennsylvania to do the best that you can to be 100% focused on the road. So, but yeah, it's always that phrase, it'll never happen to me. I can do it. Maybe that person can't do it, but I can do it. I can figure out how to text
Even
and drive.
the smallest amount of time. If you're traveling, you know, our roads allow up to 70 miles an hour, and just a quick glance at a phone.
How fast?
You're traveling, you know, hundreds of feet, right, and without looking up, and it doesn't take much, and there are so many near misses to every accident. In 2018 alone, we had 65 fatalities that were attributed to human distraction. Right. And you know, each one of those lives is very valuable, and even any number over 0 is too many.
Right.
And so we truly have to do everything, and that's why we're grateful to have this bill to give us one more resource that we can help educate people as well as enforce.
Right. It's going to the major here to talk about the enforcement piece of it, which I think has been really critical when, as a legislator, you want to make sure that you're protecting people, both the driver who's actually possibly doing the incident, and then a very innocent driver who's on the other end, who's just driving along and not using their phone. So it's a dual approach to say, we're not coming after a driver just to be able to ticket them and just to be able to, you know, get revenue, which sometimes causes a lot of problems in our legislative process. This is about protecting innocent people. You are affecting the safety of others when you do an action. A lot of times we talk about the seatbelt law, and it gets equated to this. And so, well, seatbelt is really for your safety more than anything. And so this bill is the safety not only of you, which we hope helps you and change your behavior, but it's for the safety of other people. But Major, on the fact of enforcement over the years, there was a no texting law in Pennsylvania, but it's very difficult to enforce that law. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, under the current law, it's basically a texting law. You're not allowed to have your phone in your hand and be texting, but you were allowed to hold the phone up and push a button to receive a text, or to turn on and off your phone, or to use it as a global positioning system. And we couldn't identify driving past somebody, whether they were texting or talking on the phone. This law, House Bill 37, will actually improve that, make that a lot more enforceable for us. And that is our job out there, is if you talk to each trooper that comes on, they talk about, when they come on, we interview them, why do you want to come here? And it's like, well, because I want to protect people, I want to make a difference. It's not to write citations to generate revenue, but our job is to correct driver behavior or influence driver behavior, and the way that we do that is pull people over, either give them or issue a citation or issue a written warning. And just last year with our this year, our distracted driving stats, we've issued 3,200 distracted driving citations to date and 1,600 written warnings for distracted driving. So every time you get pulled over doesn't mean you're going to get hit in the pocketbook.
Right.
But we do want to change behavior. If you're traveling 60 miles an hour, that's 88 feet per second. That's a tractor trailer is about 80 feet long. So you're driving farther than a tractor trailer if you look down for 1 second. So if you're in traffic, and it may be something else that encroaches on the roadway, but if you weren't distracted, you could have reacted to it. And we're not saying that it's a combination of everything that
Right.
causes that problem. And if you remove that phone from the driver, that eliminates one of the distractions.
Right. So when you say, and you may or may not know this, in the distracted driving statistics that you just said,
Yes.
that's pretty much could be a lot of different distractions, right? Not just the cell phone.
Right. It's
Okay.
not just cell phone.
Right,
It's
it's a full-
people reading the newspaper,
Right.
Applying makeup,
Right.
talking to a passenger, trying to
Right.
pick something up off of the floor.
Right.
So that those 3,200 citations are not all just dealing with cell phones. But again, this legislation is a step in the right direction. We want to modify driver behavior to increase safety on the highways.
Yeah, and that piece is something where we talk about distracted driving sometime in the legislative process, it makes it difficult. Well, people will say, legislators, well, what about putting on makeup? What about drinking a cup of coffee? And so that is true. But my feelings when I was drafting this legislation was the phone has sort of taken over the car much more than anything else. And the amount of distraction that a phone can give, you really can't compare the two. I don't think they're apples to apples as far as saying a cup of coffee and a cell phone use. They're different in the utilization. A cup of coffee could be very dangerous too if it spills, and so there's the reality of that. But oftentimes in the legislative process, well, what about everything else? But my feeling was this seems to have taken over the car and the driver. And if you look in the cars when you're driving, you see it. One of the officers had said to me, if I go past a car and they have the phone up like this, I really can't do anything. I can't, they could have it right, traveling,
Right.
moving, and they have it up. Now, is that true?
That is true.
Right.
The way it is currently written
Written.
in legislation, we can't differentiate when we're driving down the road, and we can't obviously pull them over not knowing that it's a violation.
Right.
So we have to let them go. Now, if they commit another violation, they swerve or run off the road or run a light, then we can pull them over, but we still can't look through that phone to even see if they were violating the text.
Which
law.
I think most people watching would say, if you're driving down the highway and somebody has it straight up or down, whatever it may be, there's absolutely nothing an officer can do to say that that's not appropriate driver behavior. It's almost like having the DUI and not being able to do any sort of enforcement if you see somebody going over the line, just because you wouldn't know for sure.
Because they could just be picking the phone up to turn it
Right.
on to accept the call, and
Right.
that is acceptable
Right,
behavior.
right. So I find that very interesting, and I think that's why, as we continue the conversation, is to say why there needs to be some changes to the law. It needs to be strengthened, especially as we move forward, and it seems to be becoming more of a problem. So Nina, on the AAA end, when you talk about this situation and with your membership, and where does it go usually? I mean, I'm assuming, I know that you're in favor of it as AAA.
Mm-hmm.
Do you hear any other sides of the story as far as enhanced cell phone laws?
The same, again, the research and education, we do just a lot of the educational efforts to, even if there isn't a ban, just so drivers are aware of the overall effects and the increase in accidents and fatalities as a result to those distractions. 2 seconds off your eyes off the road just doubles your chances of getting into a crash. And when you see there's so many more people that are on the roadways anymore and more distractions, if someone's broken down on the side of the road and someone happens to be texting or on their phone, it's again adding another distraction. So on AAA's efforts, just a lot of this overall research and driving statistics and looking at the actual number of fatalities and accidents as a result of distracted driving. 2017 alone, 17% of the fatalities were due to distractions. So again, just the overall, it may not be everything, but I think with cell phones, everybody's so addicted to their phones today. You don't see anybody even walking around the street without a cell phone on their hand. But you're now driving a motor vehicle, and you need to, be that educational reference, and especially for parents. We're seeing a lot more statistics of the younger drivers because they're not as educated, not as experienced of a driver, and they can't multitask as much while behind the wheel. So we're seeing an increase in the younger drivers, especially getting into these accidents due to using their cell phones. So if parents are also using their cell phones, it's not setting a good example for the children and new drivers. And we're even hearing that younger drivers, they're waiting to get their driver's licenses, and because of those overall fears.
And I've heard that from my constituents as well.
Yeah, so it's definitely, again, just trying to educate, not only AAA members, but every day, anybody who has a driver's license out there. AAA, actually a club in Southern California, started a large initiative called, it's AAA.com/Don't Drive Distracted. And it's a national AAA campaign now where we ask members and everyday drivers to take a pledge. And the overall pledge is to put your phone down. It's a great program just to overall, in like schools or parents can talk to their children about it. And again, just stressing the overall education and effects of distracted driving.
Right. Well, on that note, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with the legislative report.
Did you know that on October 4th, 1911, the statues that greet visitors in front of the state capitol building in Harrisburg were dedicated to the citizens of the Commonwealth? In 1902, George Gray Bernard was commissioned to design the figures that embellish the front of the Capitol building. During the installation period, Bernard explained to the General Assembly what each sculpture symbolized. The Southern group, titled The Burden of Life, depicts the story of Adam and Eve followed by the fall of man in the forms of despair. The Northern group, titled Love and Labor, depicts male and female figures reaping fruits of labor and advances to a new Adam and Eve who gaze westward into the future. Recently, both sculptures underwent restoration to prevent further deterioration from their natural beauty. Now you know.
Welcome back to the Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Rosemary Brown. We're continuing our conversation on House Bill 37, a piece of legislation I have drafted and introduced to try to help with our cell phone use behind the wheel of the car. We are having a fantastic conversation about the pros, the cons, and why it's needed in Pennsylvania. And Nina, with AAA, we were just, before the break, we were talking a little bit about the age use of the cell phone, and it spurred me to think of a story with my kids just about a month ago. And my kids are all teenagers now, and they're in the back seat, I'm driving, and we saw a car swerving, and I stood back. We saw a couple different things. So we get to a point where there's two lanes, and we look over, and I'm saying, I bet you it's a younger driver, you know, and they're giving their 2 cents. We pull up next to the car, and they said, my goodness, Mom, it's a lady your age. So it was a mature driver, and they actually almost went into the back of a car. That's what brought our attention at a light. And then we followed them, and they were still swerving. So it's interesting to hear the ages. Although it seems to be more of the younger group because, you know, they believe that they can do it or they're not as educated, I'm seeing a lot of older drivers, more mature drivers doing this as well. And so your thoughts on that a little bit more?
It's definitely all ages, even though some of the statistics that we see on the younger drivers and the amount of distracted driving, it's all ages. So it's the more mature driver, the parents, and also the younger new drivers. But it is age-wide. There's no direct pinpoint on a certain age group that we're seeing with the distracted driving. I think, as like I said before, more people are utilizing their phones today. We're living busier lifestyles, so people have a hard time putting that down and actually stopping when they need to be on the road driving, checking emails or texts coming through. It's just that reminder that you need to shut that down when you're behind the wheel, have both hands on the wheel, and truly be in focus when you're on to your destination.
Shows the addictive quality, I think, of the phone on the brain, no matter what age you are. And I've been working through this for the last, couple of years, and the phrase that always stays with me is, the best cell phone use in the car is no cell phone use. And it really is true. It's very hard, I know myself. I've been trying, but with the hands-free and sometimes with phone calls in our schedule, and that's the problem. You're utilizing the technology for the best of your time, but I really have been doing my best, and it is difficult. So on the, Secretary Richards, on the level of hands-free versus holding the phone, we've had some statistics, we've talked about that. You're still distracted with hands-free, but the belief that there really is a significant difference.
Yeah, I also serve as the vice chair of the Transportation Research Board. It's part of the Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine. And they did a very comprehensive study that showed the increase in serious accidents as well as fatalities when people are holding their phones. And that can be holding it and looking, at their nav system, looking at where they need to go. It could be holding and speaking. It can be obviously holding and texting, which is extremely dangerous. But it is really important to have that hands-free, to be able to have both hands on the wheel and not holding something, especially holding something that you need to, put out in front of you. And I think that's very important. I also think there's, all of us fall, for this, but, we think we're bored, right, while we're driving. And I had a very interesting conversation with younger drivers in high school. In fact, they had just gotten their licenses. And we were asking them about texting and what could we do to reduce the amount of texting and distracted driving. And, I asked, why are you looking at your cell phone? And, they're scrolling through social media. And then I asked how many of those things could wait until they got out of the car. Because the majority of times, you're not in the car for that long, right? Could something wait a half hour, 45 minutes, 20 minutes? Think about it, right? There's it can wait, hashtag it can wait, and it can wait. There are very few things that we do. I mean, we want to show that we're attentive. We want to let our bosses know that we're right on it. We want to let our coworkers know that we care. We want to let our friends know that, they're important to us and we're responding right away. But guess what? That response means a lot more if you can just say, hey, I'll text you when I'm in a safe place. So some people are there are apps that you can use that say, I'm in the car right now and I will get back to you. If you're someone who wants to give an immediate response, that's a great app to use. Let people know that as soon as you're in a safe place, you'll respond. And that's really the responsible thing to do.
And that spreads, again, the respect and the urgency. So it's catchy when you have it. Oh, somebody else will put it on, and then it starts to the hashtag it can wait message is really important.
Absolutely.
So, and I always sort of mention too, what happened to pulling off to the side of the road or pulling into, a parking lot and saying, okay, if I have to respond, I have to do that. That's really
one of the things we address, particularly with younger drivers, but it's for older drivers too. If you're in the car, right, offer to be the texter, right?
Yes.
We always have a designated driver. You can have a designated texter in the car. You can also be a good passenger and encourage, no texting while in the car, right? Exactly. You can all encourage everybody to wait till afterwards. So it's on the passenger as well. And just make it easy, and definitely don't put pressure on the driver to respond to any texts or anything that's unnecessary while they're driving.
The kids are watching.
Absolutely.
The kids, the grandkids are watching, everybody's watching in the car, so the example is important. And Major, we also talk about the statistics of the crashes and fatalities, or even just other crashes that are related to distracted driving. Is it often very difficult to attribute that it was a cell phone that caused the crash? Do you know that information? Or?
Yeah, it is very difficult because to look into someone's cell phone, you have to have a search warrant.
Right.
And a lot of times we know what the main cause or what the primary factor was that caused the crash, like running the stop sign or driving off the road. But once we determine, okay, the driving on roadways lane for traffic is the section for driving off the road. Well, that's what they violated. The officer hits that check mark on the crash report and may hit that the cell phone was in use or may not. So basically we end up going to the emergency room, talking to the people and asking them if they were on their cell phone, because we'd have to have a search warrant. And you'd be surprised how many people were not on their cell phone when they tell you that. But in the gut,
you pretty much know, right, that there was an issue.
So it could possibly be a way where we could improve our report. Like right now, it's distracted driving this year in 2019 was a cause in 1,791 crashes that PSP investigated. But then you have other places where texting was a cause, is 28. Driving using a handheld phone was a cause, is 32. But they were all different blocks. So I think we'll do a better job of training our troopers to complete those reports more accurately, so we can get accurate numbers. But there's a lot going on in the cars, and I just have to comment on the children in the cars and the texting and whatnot. My son's just started driving as well.
Oh, that's always fun.
Yes, and I found it following the rules of the road. If it is a no texting zone in the car, would be great, because there is so much going on in the car. And when my son started to drive, I'm like, how do you not know the rules of the road? Because you ride with me all the time. Well, ever since they were infants, there was some type of electronic device in the car to entertain them. So they're not mimicking driver behavior by watching us drive. They don't even know where the roads are, how to get to a place without a GPS. So I think a lot more would be learned if they, no texting zone, as Leslie said, and we watch and mimic good behavior. And again, that's why we want those drivers not to be texting while they're driving.
Right. The House Bill 37, to me, is the behavior change, as we've all been talking about, the expectation that when you come into Pennsylvania and you come into our state from New Jersey, New York, many of them have the hands-free. 20 states, I believe, are now. Just this past week, Maine passed their law into place. And so it's moving along. But to come into PA and know the expectation of the driver is to be as responsible as possible, especially with the cell phone, and not come through Pennsylvania and say, okay, well, I'm in Pennsylvania, I'm going to pick up the phone now, or I'm going to be able to do whatever I want with the phone and take my eyes off the road or whatever else it may be. So it's truly a reasonable measure, I believe, to help it. And one of the pieces in the legislation, which I know you all know, is that you are able to use your GPS, which again is reasonable, with a docking station. We just have a couple minutes left, so docking stations. And your thoughts on docking stations, the ability to be able to use the GPS, as little touching and as little as distraction as possible. They are distracting, but they're necessary for us to travel. What are your thoughts on docking stations?
I think you don't need your hands, so you can use both hands, so I think they are a good thing.
Helpful.
A lot of cars now have screens in them, right? So you're kind of looking, and there's the issues with that. But you can also turn on sound to help you, right? You can have, hey, turn left. You can have someone talking you through the directions, which is a good thing too. That doesn't even require you to take a look. So I think they're a good thing. I just also, while we're together, just want to mention, construction zones. We have a lot of people working on our roadways, and I know that can be frustrating. There's detours, there's delays that are caused by construction, but we have a lot of roadways out there, a lot of miles of roadways, a lot of bridges that need to be repaired and replaced. And it requires people out on our roadways, and we have lost way too many employees as well as contractors, because when you're distracted for that short amount of time, you come up on a construction zone before you know it, right? And you're not slowing down, and you're right up against those workers. And we're seeing way too many crashes coming into our zones, going into our vehicles, going, God forbid, into our employees, into our contractors. And we want to keep everybody safe.
Again, a very innocent person, and there's not a lot of wiggle room to make an adjustment when you take your eyes off the road.
And even when there's an accident, and I know you're well aware of that, right? And the state police come on the scene, the towers come on the scene, ambulances if needed, medical needed. And you can come up on a scene like that unexpected all of a sudden. And if you are distracted in any way, your reaction time is truly slowed down.
Correct. We're using, and we are partnering with PennDOT on a lot of projects with the steer clear law, the move over law, if you call it that, to get people over during accident investigations. The highly autonomous vehicles with the crash attenuator truck in the construction zone to try to remove people
from that
vehicle so that they're not hurt. So this House Bill 37 helps move towards that safety initiative that we're working together with PennDOT with.
Well, thank you very much. The time goes so fast, and all three of you and your organizations and agencies have been very supportive of moving this forward, and I thank you for some of the details that you offered our viewers today. And House Bill 37 is, again, hands-free cell phone use in Pennsylvania, reasonable, realistic, and enforceable. It is a $200 fine. If it goes through to in-law, which we hope to see in the near future, again, would help again with our road systems and improve safety. So it's something that we are hoping to see move forward and be on the governor's desk shortly. So I thank you all very much for being here, for your support for the legislation, and all your hard work and everything you do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Rosemary Brown. If you have any questions regarding this matter or any other state-related issues, please feel free to contact my office.